Alrighty. Just trying to get myself ready here. Seeing how this live stream works. I'm a little early. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's not good. Hold on. Why is this thing not? Okay. Yes. It's headphones. Alrighty. Okay. Alrighty. Give me a couple minutes to get myself settled. That's why I started a little earlier. All right. Everything seems good. I'm going to cut the audio on the viewer so I don't keep hearing echo. And give it a few more minutes, 3 more minutes, and I'll be ready to go. So. Yes. My channel. Alright, so I'm live now. How do I get rid of these? Maybe those will all go away. Alright, so nobody's really in here yet. Since I have 2 watching, I think I'm one of the 2. Alright, so alright, again, I got another minute before it's officially 9:30. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I believe they should be able to. Okay. Live now. 3 watching. Okay, that's good. Hello, who's watching? Just waiting to exactly 9:30 here. I believe it is now 9:30, so it is the official time for this to start. And Mandy's in the chat. Hello, Mandy. And so let's just start talking about this book, Stalking Jack the Ripper. I really, really like this book. I was actually surprised at how much I like this book. And this is part of a trilogy of books right now. And for those who aren't aware, this is a story about a girl named Audrey Rose who works with her uncle doing forensics. And they wind up seeing some brutal killings, which is obviously from Jack the Ripper. And she has a connection to this case. And you find out how it goes along. That's really interesting, and the story is really good. And one thing I happen to really enjoy about Carrie Maniscalco's writing is I really love the way she does actual descriptive lines. I tweeted out when I first started reading this book, the actual first line of this book is, I placed my thumb and forefinger on the icy flesh, spreading it taut above the breastbone as Uncle has showed me. So just the concept of using icy flesh and the way she describes scenes in this book all the way throughout this book is really good. I really loved the way this author uses descriptive language. It is just so well done. It really did blow me away with the way she actually writes that kind of stuff. So it also has a nice little picture here on the cover there, the first chapter. You can see an autopsy starting to be done. So let me actually pull up my Goodreads, because I went in detail on Goodreads. If you see my Goodreads book club account, you will see that I actually cover each chapter individually and talk about what's going on in each chapter, which is what we're going to do. So for those who haven't read Stalking Jack the Ripper or want to read Stalking Jack the Ripper, you might not want to actually watch this live show. But for those who have read it and want to hear me discuss it, or for those who are in the chat and have read it and want to actually discuss it, feel free. But let's just get into it. So in this chapter, we're introduced to Audrey Rose, the first chapter, and her uncle who performs autopsy and is teaching Audrey about it. We find out that her father's against her being taught that kind of thing. That's not a girl thing to be taught. That's not something a girl should do. And in fact, actually, the whole concept of autopsies is looked down upon. It's looked as anti-religious, desecrating bodies type of thing. So it's not a very revered science currently at this time. This is actually obviously during the time of Jack the Ripper, so it was turn of the century, late 1800s in London, where this book takes place. And you find out, that she actually has her aunt giving her lessons on how to be a proper lady. So she obviously really likes the whole concept of forensic science. She definitely wants to go into the same field that her uncle goes into. Her uncle actually teaches at an all-boys school. So at the end of the chapter, we find out that for her to actually go to one of her uncle's classes, she's going to have to actually masquerade herself as a boy in order to actually go to the class on forensic science. And that's basically the end of the first chapter. So now we get to the second chapter, and we see a victim in this class, and we see the love interest, partner, that all YA books kind of have. He is the typical smart-ass character that you see in a lot of YA, and his name is Thomas. We see that Thomas has a really good deduction skill, kind of, a la Sherlock Holmes type of feel to him. Can just deduce things, and that becomes a big part of Thomas's character throughout the book. And Thomas's first deduction is he figures out that Audrey is actually masquerading as a man in the class, and is able to call her out on it. And that's pretty much how chapter 2 ends. So now we get to chapter 3, and we get to meet a little bit more of Audrey's family. We get to see Audrey's brother Nathaniel. We find out more about Audrey's upbringing. We find out that she's from money. I've already talked about how autopsies are considered unholy acts because of desecrating corpses and stuff like that. We also find out that something happened to Audrey's mom, and it made her father a wreck. And we find out that this victim of this Jack the Ripper, which they don't call him Jack the Ripper yet, this victim actually worked for Audrey's family at one time, which makes it a lot more personal to her to figure out who the murderer is. And the name of the killer that they use is the Leather Apron. That's actually the term that they give the killer before he calls himself Jack the Ripper later on. And that's how the chapter 3 ends. In chapter 4, we actually find out what happens to Audrey's mom. So what happens is Audrey had scarlet fever, and her mother, while caring for her, caught the bug. And then she has heart issues, and because of the heart issues, she died. So Audrey's always labeled herself as a murderer, really felt guilty about it. Her father, from this, actually became totally paranoid of germs, going as far as removing and changing the help frequently, which is why this woman who actually died was a former employee of her father's. And we also find out that the death of Audrey's mother actually pushed her towards science, and she kind of is anti-religious in this book if you read the book, because she said her prayers didn't help her, and she said science could, so she went into science basically from this. So that's how that chapter ends. Before I actually end this chapter, there was a couple of good lines here. One of the line was, God no longer holds dominion over my soul. So religion played a part in this book, with the killer's motivations as well. And the nature of science versus religion actually was a pretty big part of that time period. You had Darwinism and all this whole stuff going on around that turn of the century time, and a lot of religion versus science arguments were happening. So I think it actually fits well with what's going on in this story. And also in this chapter, Audrey sneaks out to investigate the pub the victim was frequenting, to do some sleuthing to solve the murder. But she's kind of grabbed by Thomas, along with her brother, scolding her for being out in a dangerous place. And we find out that Nathaniel and Thomas are part of this group called the Knights of Whitechapel. I feel basically they're kind of like the guardian angels that used to be in New York City in the 80s, late 70s, I guess. A neighborhood watch type of group, looking to patrol the area for the killer. And in chapter 5, then we find out that Audrey's father's unwell. He's perspiring a lot. Audrey uses excuses to get out of the house to join her uncle again, because there's another murder that took place on the same street she was the night during her investigation. And we find that there were screws and gears near the body, and her reproductive organs were missing. In fact, there's a couple of little steampunkish aspects to this story that I thought were actually pretty cool. And they also conclude that the killer thinks himself of a god, ridding the world of vile sinners. So that's where the religion aspect comes in. So that's basically the first 5 chapters. And again, I was really enjoying this. I really enjoyed the way the story was flowing, going pretty quickly. And again, I really love the writing, the little, YA banter between Thomas and Audrey. It's typical in a lot of YA books, but still wasn't overly done. Wasn't was pretty nice. I thought I really enjoyed it. So we get to chapter 6, and in chapter 6 we find out that Audrey's father was sent away because of his abuse of Laudelin. And Audrey also realizes that the true first victim of Jack the Ripper was Emma Elizabeth Smith, another person who they didn't tie to the Jack the Ripper crimes right away. Then in chapter 7, Audrey goes snooping in her father's study and finds some clockwork pieces and gears around also. And she finds that her father has an article on Emma Smith, and she wonders why would he have an article on his first victim. So we go into chapter 8. There's some more Tom and Audrey banter, showing off Tom's deductive skills as he figures out that Audrey was planning to visit her father's former valet to find a connection between her father and the victims. And we find out that the valet is actually deathly sick at the end of this chapter. In chapter 9, we find out that the valet's sickness is actually a form of leprosy, and there's a secret that he's keeping. But before he dies, he can't tell the secret to Audrey. But she does learn something. It appears that her uncle and this other victim, Elizabeth Smith, were actually betrothed at one time. And she was also a close friend of Audrey's mother. And there's one name that was mentioned before he died, Alistair. That's one name that this valet mentioned before he died. So we go to chapter 10 and we find out that Alistair was her father's old carriage driver. And he works on the deck of the Mary Sue now. And he was fired by Audrey's father shortly after her mother's death. She finds out that from the captain that he was making a delivery at the Jolly Jack. So in chapter 11, she goes to the Jolly Jack. And you find out that this carriage driver is actually dead. He was killed before Audrey could question him. You also find out in this chapter that someone's been asking to court Audrey, and her father supports it because it's a merging of two families. She doesn't know who this is, so it's an arranged type of marriage. And obviously, she's a very independent woman, doesn't really want to support this, but her father's trying to push it. In chapter 12, we find out that the carriage driver was killed by a gear. Again, with the steampunk type of issue here. A gear was used to slash open his throat. And the first 2 murders, there were gears. And disturbingly, Audrey's uncle is arrested on suspicion that he's the killer at the end of this chapter. So she goes to her uncle's lab. It's chapter 13. She goes to her uncle's lab. She sees the police ramshacking the place, looking for evidence. They also find gears from the crime scene that the uncle stole from the police. And supposedly they have witnesses that places her uncle in the area at the time of the murder. But Audrey basically says that he has not a unique body shape, and anybody they could say could look like him. It wasn't really a definitive ID. And we also find out that he was sent to a mental hospital after being arrested. And in the next chapter, Audrey actually goes to a tea party, trying to socialize. And we find out that there's other character, Liza, which is her cousin, who's all excited about Thomas and Audrey and the attraction between the two of them, and wants to find out all about this. And at the end of this story, at the end of this chapter, one of the things that she does agree to go is she agrees to go to the circus with her family to take her mind off the whole uncle being arrested and controversy and trying to sort things out. And when she gets to the circus, Detective Blackburn, um, who she met during the ransacking, when she went to actually the uncle's place, finds out that he urgently wants to speak to Audrey. So we get to chapter 16, and you find out that the uncle is considered the killer, and they don't want to drag this out. They say no further crimes were committed while he was in sanitarium, so they believe that he's the killer. They just want to railroad it through because they just want to end this case quickly and get rid of all the press. So Audrey and Blackburn go to the asylum and find out that her uncle's been drugged, so she can't really get any information out of him. He just stares into space, reciting his own name over and over again. So next chapter, she finds Thomas at a mortuary and finds out he's paying for bodies to do experiments on. Unclaimed bodies, but still, Audrey's suspicious. We also find out that the reason her uncle was drugged was to make him look more insane during the trial to make it easier to convict him. Chapter 19, we actually get a letter delivered to the newspaper from the killer who, proves that they don't have the killer in custody. And this is where he actually gets the name Jack the Ripper from, because he calls himself Jack the Ripper. And at this time, Thomas actually realizes that the perfume Audrey was wearing is on the scent of one of the letters, which again is very curious. In chapter 20, to confirm that the killer is still out there, we have a double murder. So at this time, they know they got the wrong man because they had 2 murders while this person was in prison, was in custody. And on this chapter, we also find out that person who was courting Audrey was Blackburn. So he also becomes a little suspicious as far as his motives. Then we get to the next chapter, which is chapter 21. And at that time, we find out that not only did the uncle operate on Audrey's mother, because what happened was when Audrey's mother was sick, the uncle actually tried to operate on her to save her. But we find out that Thomas's mother also had problems with her gallbladder, and that he was working with the uncle as well, and that all of this experiments that Thomas has been doing on these dead bodies is related to gallbladder. So again, it kind of casts a little suspicion on Thomas as well. That's basically what this book does. It kind of just does what a great mystery does. It kind of casts suspicions on all these different people all the way throughout the book. So in chapter 22, you find out that Queen Victoria is throwing a Jack the Ripper party, which I thought was really interesting about the time and the gap between the rich and poor, because this was a party where people would basically dress up as Jack the Ripper for this party. And I thought it was really complete bad taste, but also shows how there is such a disconnect between the poor population and the wealthier population, and how obviously these women are dying, but the real upper crust of society doesn't really care because they can actually throw parties about Jack the Ripper. And we also find out that another letter from Jack the Ripper's on Earth. We learn about Thomas's backstory with his mother more. And in chapter 23, we meet a medium. This is Robert James Lee, who is a real person. If you follow the end of the book, actually, there's some appendices to the end of the book where she talks about some of the real stuff she took out of the Jack the Ripper story. And Robert Lee James was a real person, and he said he had a message from one of the victims for Audrey. He says that she knows who the killer is, and that the killer was someone who was angry with her the day they found Miss Eddowes. So Audrey at the time could only think of two people at the time who were angry with her, and that was Blackburn and her father. So again, we have two more. Inspired to read my first Stephen King novel, Pet Sematary. Ah, cool book fan. That's I really like Pet Sematary. I thought Pet Sematary was actually a really good book. And yeah, I like to go through the book. That's what I do on these live streams. I pretty much go chapter by chapter throughout the whole book because I think it's such a fun thing to do. Let me see where I was. Okay. So yeah, Robert James. Yeah, Blackburn and her father. Okay, so now we think it's either Blackburn or her father. So now in chapter 24, we find out that half a kidney was sent by the killer, and it was eaten. Which I didn't actually know that there was any kind of cannibalism in the Jack the Ripper story, but Audrey suspects that her father might be the killer now, because in the next chapter she actually finds a carriage in the neighborhood that the Ripper frequents, and it is her father's carriage. So we're getting close to the end here. In chapter 26, we see that her father actually picks up a woman in that district. You know, I guess a woman of ill repute, and they follow him home, but nothing happens. But then somehow the woman gets found dead. Now they follow this carriage. They don't know how this woman got found dead, and they find a note in chapter 27. She finds a note with the word "from hell" underlined, which is actually in the Jack the Ripper notes. So it definitely connects this house and her father's study with Jack the Ripper. And she also finds a secret area, which confirms that there were experiments being performed. That it was in her father's study. There was a little secret area. And at that time, someone confronts her. And at this time, we find out it's her brother. And of course, the next misdirection is it's her brother who was the killer, which then links everything to the house and the study and the secret room and what he did to his father. He actually drugged his father, and he was able to sneak down into the study. And the whole purpose of these experiments, as far as what he was doing with these women, was he was collecting organs and kind of building a Frankenstein type of thing to bring his mother back. That was basically what he was thinking about doing. Did you find the two leads competing for her uncle's attention a bit annoying? Um, not any more than typical YA. I mean, I think it was kind of, they have to have some kind of conflict between the two of them, and I've seen worse, I've seen better, but in general, it didn't annoy me too much because I guess I'm used to it. So I didn't find the conflict between uh, Audrey and Thomas and Uncle trying to like one up each other as far as like who's smarter, trying to compete. I didn't really find that as an issue. Like I said, I really just enjoyed the story for what it was. So chapter 29, we have the confrontation. Her father shows up with Thomas, who of course figures out what's going on because Thomas is the brain person who's able to figure out what's going on, and her brother at this time actually gets killed. And the last chapter is her father kind of agrees to send Audrey to study forensics because Thomas talked to him, and of course her relationship with Thomas is increasing because he had a role in her father's change of heart. And again, this is only part one of 3 books right now, so I am looking forward to seeing where this story goes. But all in all, I still really did enjoy this book. I really felt like it was, it is YA-esque. So if you're not interested in that YA kind of romance kind of connection, with the smart ass type of kid, and the kid who thinks he's too good to be true, and that whole uh, it's a trope that you've seen in a lot of YA. It's here in spades. But otherwise, I still really did like the writing. I really loved the descriptiveness of the story. I liked the mystery. I thought it kept you guessing. Um, so all in all, I really did think it was a really interesting book, and I am looking forward to reading more of this. As you know, if you've watched my other video, next month's book will be a horror book. Will be "We Sold Our Soul" by Grady Hendrix, which I am seriously looking forward to reading. And next month's live show, I will do what I always do: is I will, a week before the live show, I will make a quick little video telling you about the live show and telling you what the next month for November's book will be. For those who are watching, I let you know that November's book will probably be a nonfiction book that I'm thinking of reading for nonfiction November. But knowing me, it's going to probably be a subject that's going to be kind of interesting. And I think that's about it. I think, when I do these live streams by myself, it kind of goes quick. So for all those who watched, thanks again for commenting. For all these who are watching this on delay and just hopefully you enjoyed this video as well as I did. Hopefully you'll continue to support my book club, support my channel. Uh, Again, like I just said to everybody, We Sold Our Souls is the next book for next month. And again, I think I'm just going to end it right here. Um, so thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.